The 7th of January, 2007. It was a freezing afternoon in Waverly Township, Michigan. Snow covered the quiet roads and fields. But that calm was broken when a call came into the Comstock Township Fire Department. A house was on fire near 51st Street. The firefighters rushed to the scene, fearing the worst. They knew the area well. The old farmhouse, hidden behind bare winter trees, belonged to Todd and Linda Sturmer, a couple known by most of the neighbors. By the time the fire trucks arrived, the house was already engulfed in flames. Thick smoke billowed into the sky, and orange flames poured out of both sides of the house. It was no small fire, it was an inferno. Knowing the couple had several children, the firefighters feared there might be lives still trapped inside. They braced themselves to enter the blaze. Then, out front, they saw something horrifying. Todd Sturmer was lying in the snow, badly burned, barely recognizable. He was naked except for sweatpants around his ankles and a pair of boots. He looked like he had crawled out of the house before collapsing. His injuries were severe, his skin charred, his breathing weak. Despite the firefighters' efforts to revive him, Todd died at the scene. He never said a word. Linda Sturmer stood nearby, barefoot and shaking. Her voice was panicked, but she wasn't physically hurt. She told the officers that the children weren't home. They had gone out earlier that day, luckily avoiding the fire. That was the good news. But nothing else made sense. Strange details began to stand out. Tire tracks in odd places, a car parked away from the house, and items arranged strangely in the yard. Investigators noted these signs immediately. They didn't look like the remains of a simple accident. As the sun set, the house continued to smolder. All that remained was a shell of blackened beams and wet ash. One life was lost. One remained, and already quiet suspicions were forming. It didn't feel like a random tragedy. Something darker was hiding beneath the surface. Before the fire, Todd and Linda Sturmer seemed like a regular, hard-working couple trying to build their dream life in rural Michigan. They had a large, blended family, 5 children in total, and lived on a small farm outside of Lawrence. The land had been bought after years of saving. It was filled with oak and pine trees, and they had slowly built it up into a working farm. Horses, dogs, chickens, you name it, they had it. Todd was a man who wore many hats. He was once a high school sports official and coach, someone kids looked up to. Later, he ran a small glove and hunting gear business, which did well for a time. He was known to be charismatic, fun, and very committed to providing for his family. Linda, on the other hand, worked as a dialysis technician. She was passionate about animals, especially horses, and treated her farm as a side business, eventually caring for over 30 horses. But caring for that many animals took money, a lot of it. And money was something they didn't always have enough of. They had built a home over years, piece by piece, room by room, with Todd doing most of the work himself. The children would later describe their household as loud but loving, filled with pets, laughter, and occasional arguments like any family. But all was not as perfect as it seemed. Cracks had begun to show in their marriage. Stress, finances, and personal issues were building tension. Their relationship, once warm and supportive, had started to turn cold. Todd had become moody and angry. Linda, meanwhile, was growing tired, resentful, and emotionally distant. On the outside, the Sturmer home looked like a picture of rural family life. But behind the doors, pressure was building like a volcano ready to erupt. And when it finally did, it would leave nothing behind but ashes, heartbreak, and suspicion. The Sturmer marriage wasn't just struggling, it was unraveling. Todd, once full of life and energy, had become temperamental. Small things would set him off. At times, Linda confided in her mother that living with Todd had become unbearable. The love they once had was now tangled in stress and constant arguments. Their daughters, Ashley and Brittany, described Todd as controlling and angry. They said he often yelled at their mother and scared them. But Todd's biological sons, Trevor and Trenton, saw things differently. To them, Todd was strict but kind. He didn't hit their mom, they said. At most, he grabbed her arm when he was frustrated. This split in perception would later divide the family in more ways than one. Linda, for her part, wasn't innocent. She was obsessed with her horses, investing money they didn't have into keeping the animals. When Todd found out she had borrowed $25,000 for them, he was furious. Meanwhile, he wasn't managing his glove business well either. His new ideas-get-rich-quick schemes mostly never worked, and they were deep in debt. Fights over money turned into fights about everything. They were both overwhelmed. 5 kids, too many animals, jobs, and a crumbling marriage. And then came betrayal. Linda started seeing someone else. At her clinic, she had grown close to a male coworker. What began as friendly chats soon became flirtation, then a full-blown affair. Todd didn't know at first, but that would change soon, and when he found out, the consequences would be deadly. This wasn't just a broken marriage. It was a powder keg, and someone was about to light the match. On the night of the 6th of January, 2007, just one day before the fire, everything came crashing down. Todd had spent the day working on the house. It was cold and tiring. As he rummaged through papers and items inside, he found something that didn't belong, an unfamiliar message sent to Linda. The tone, the name, the words said didn't take long for Todd to realize that his wife was cheating on him. He confronted her, and according to the children, the argument that followed was the worst they had ever seen. Voices screamed so loud that a neighbor across the fields heard them. Linda's daughters would later recall the shouting, the anger, the threats. Todd was enraged. Linda stood her ground. Ashley, one of Linda's daughters, wasn't home that night, but the other 4 children saw the entire scene unfold. The family, already divided emotionally, was shaken. This wasn't just an argument, it felt like the end. Todd and Linda barely spoke the next morning. Whatever was said that night left scars that wouldn't heal. But Linda had something more than heartbreak in her eyes. Some of the children noticed it. Something darker. She was cold, calculating, focused. By noon the next day, the house would be on fire, and Todd would be dead. The morning of the 7th of January, 2007 was freezing cold. Snow blanketed the land, and the Sturmer farm was unusually quiet. Linda seemed tense, even more than usual. Her sons, Trevor and Trenton, remembered her acting strange. She rushed them out of the house, insisting they go to town to watch a movie even though they wanted to stay. It was cold, and they didn't understand why she was pushing them so hard to leave. Before leaving, they tried to say goodbye to their dad, but Linda blocked them. "Don't bother him," she said. "He's sleeping." That struck them as odd. Todd never slept in, not even on weekends. Later, they would wonder, was he already unconscious? Or worse. Meanwhile, Linda got into Todd's van and drove to a nearby gas station. Surveillance cameras and a clerk would later confirm that she purchased only $10 worth of gasoline. Not enough to fill her van, but just enough for a different purpose. Instead of filling the tank, she funneled the fuel into a small container hidden in the back seat. Back home, she claimed to have gone down into the basement to do laundry. That's when, according to her story, she heard Todd scream. By the time she got upstairs, the living room was engulfed in flames. Instead of calling for help, she ran out barefoot, without a phone or coat, jumped into the van and drove off in the opposite direction of the front gate. According to her, the van couldn't get traction. And then something horrifying happened. She claimed she accidentally ran over her own husband as he stumbled out of the burning home. What were the odds of that? Investigators would later wonder. And so would her children. Because by then, Todd was dead. By the time firefighters arrived, Todd lay motionless in the yard, his body burned, almost beyond recognition. He never regained consciousness. Linda stood nearby, screaming, barefoot. Her clothes were clean, no smoke on her, no burns. She told officers that all the children were away for the day and that she had tried to help Todd but couldn't. But there were many things that didn't add up. First, there were gas cans found on the property, 3 of them. They were all empty and freshly moved. Their lids were off. Second, investigators noticed a strange pattern in the snow. Tire tracks that didn't make sense. A van parked far from where it should have been. And then there was the blood on the front of the van and underneath it. Linda first said she had leaned Todd against the van, but later, when told blood was found under the vehicle, she changed her story. "Maybe I accidentally ran him over," she said. And the fire? The smell of gasoline was everywhere. It was strong even through the charred wood and smoke. The burn patterns on the floor didn't match what would happen from a tipped candle or lamp. This was an inferno that started fast and burned hot. The investigators knew something wasn't right. Accidents leave traces. But this scene? It reeked of a cover-up. And so, the questions began. The investigation picked up speed quickly. Forensic experts dug through the blackened rubble of the Sturmer home. What they found told a chilling story. There was gasoline soaked into the carpet and floors. Even the basement laundry room had traces of gas, particularly on a towel inside the washing machine. That caught their attention. Linda had said she was doing laundry when the fire started. Had she used that towel to wipe her hands after setting the blaze? More disturbing was what they found on Todd's clothing, or what was left of it. His sweatpants, socks, and even his underwear were all drenched in gasoline. Someone had poured fuel directly onto him. An accident? Hardly. Investigators believe Todd had been drugged, doused in gas, and set on fire while unconscious on the living room couch. The gasoline traces weren't just spread around randomly, they were focused on him and the place where he'd been sitting. Meanwhile, Linda's story kept changing. Where she was, what she did, how she escaped, all the details shifted each time she spoke. Her sons, now deeply suspicious, started coming forward. Trevor and Trenton told officers that Linda's behavior that day wasn't normal. She had insisted they leave early. She blocked them from seeing their father. And after the fire, she told different versions of the same story over and over. To the investigators, the picture was becoming clear. This wasn't just a tragedy. It was a plan. As investigators dug deeper, they uncovered yet another motive. Linda had been having an affair. The relationship had started at her clinic 8 months before the fire. At first, it was just flirting, then private messages, then visits, and finally, a full-blown romance. When Todd discovered the truth, the night before the fire, it caused an explosive fight. That much was clear from the accounts of the children. What wasn't clear was just how far Linda would go to keep her secret life alive. The man she was seeing, Chris, would later testify that their relationship had indeed begun months before Todd's death, despite Linda claiming it started afterward. It looked bad, very bad. Investigators now had a motive, a timeline, and mounting physical evidence. They believed Linda wanted out of the marriage badly, but divorce wouldn't give her what she wanted. With Todd out of the picture, she'd get the land, the house, and a life with someone new. And so, they believed, she planned the ultimate escape, one that involved fire. Just when investigators were starting to form their theory, a woman named Kate Fox came forward. Kate had been Linda's longtime friend. The two of them had shared many personal conversations over the years. Now, Kate had something to say, something that would shock the investigators. She told them that, shortly after Todd's death, Linda had asked her to help cover up something. Specifically, Linda asked if Kate could go back to the house and remove a coffee mug from the dishwasher. Linda seemed very worried that someone would test it. Why? Because she had confessed to slipping a sedative into Todd's coffee on the morning of the fire. Kate's story didn't end there. She also told the detectives that Linda had once said, "Wouldn't it be easier if Todd was just gone?" At the time, Kate had brushed it off as a joke. Now, it didn't seem so funny. Even more chilling, Linda had once asked her, half laughing, if she knew any ways to get rid of someone permanently. That stuck with Kate. Investigators were stunned. If this was true, it meant Linda had planned everything well in advance. Although Todd's toxicology report came back inconclusive, likely because of the fire damage, the evidence was piling up. And now, Linda was no longer just a grieving widow. She was a suspect. While Kate's statement was a breakthrough, another key turning point came when Linda's own sons began to open up. Trevor and Trenton had been struggling with what they witnessed, the way their mother acted, the way her story kept changing, the odd things she said before and after the fire. Eventually, they couldn't stay silent. Trevor described how, after asking questions, his mother would get angry, sometimes violently so. He recalled one instance when she pulled the car over during a trip and began slapping him across the face for questioning her. Another time, she allegedly told his brother to beat him up when he wouldn't stop pressing her. These weren't the actions of a woman in mourning. Trenton also spoke about how Linda had sat on his bed before the fire and whispered, "Wouldn't it be better if he was dead?" At the time, he thought it was just an expression of frustration, but now it felt like a warning. Linda's emotional manipulation of her sons became a critical part of the case. Not only did it show a pattern of behavior, but it also proved that she had been trying to control the narrative from the beginning. For the detectives, this was more than enough reason to keep digging deeper. And they weren't finished yet. Back at the fire scene, forensic teams continued analyzing every detail. It was hard work. The fire had destroyed much of the house, but enough remained to reveal the truth. Experts confirmed the fire was started with an accelerant. The gasoline traces weren't just around the living room. They were concentrated on Todd's clothes and the sofa where he had been sitting. There was no sign of a tipped lamp or candle. This wasn't an accident. It was deliberate. The medical examiner shared even more bad news. Todd hadn't just been burned alive. He had suffered blunt force trauma, at least 4 blows to the head and 2 broken ribs. The wounds matched being struck by a heavy object or possibly a vehicle. That confirmed something awful. Even if he had survived the fire, he'd been badly injured beforehand. The conclusion? Someone attacked him, set him on fire, and then when he tried to escape, ran him over with a van. Every new test, every witness, and every testimony pointed to the same person, Linda. It took nearly 2 years for police and prosecutors to build their case. But by the 5th of June, 2009, they were ready. Linda was arrested and charged with first-degree premeditated murder and arson. The arrest shocked the small Michigan community. Some couldn't believe it. Others quietly said it made sense. Linda was handcuffed and taken to jail. Her expression was calm, but behind the scenes, she was panicking. She pleaded not guilty and hired a defense team. Her daughters stood by her side, but her sons Trevor and Trenton testified against her. It was a family torn in two. As the trial approached, the media caught wind of the case. A woman accused of burning her husband alive? It was the kind of case that drew headlines. Reporters lined up. Television stations followed every twist. Linda still claimed her innocence. She told the world that Todd had been abusive, that she had tried to save him, that it was just a tragic accident. But the prosecutors believed otherwise, and they had the evidence to prove it. In January of 2010, Linda's murder trial began. The courtroom was packed with journalists, curious townspeople, and heartbroken family members. Everyone wanted to know, was Linda truly capable of killing her husband? The prosecution opened strong. They laid out the timeline: Linda's affair, the argument, the gas station receipt, and the evidence of gasoline on Todd's clothing. They showed the empty gas cans, the towel soaked in fuel, and the blood under the van. They brought in fire investigators, medical experts, and even the gas station clerk. Each piece fit together like a grim puzzle. Then came the testimony from her sons. They described the manipulation, the violence, and their mother's changing stories. It was emotional. Some in the courtroom cried. Others stared in disbelief. The defense tried to fight back. They claimed Linda was being framed. They said Todd was depressed, and maybe he had set the fire himself for insurance. But they had no proof. One piece of evidence after another tore holes in their argument. And soon, the jury would have to decide. Was Linda guilty of murder, or was she a misunderstood woman caught in a terrible tragedy? As the trial moved forward, prosecutors unveiled what they believed to be a carefully crafted plan. They argued that Linda didn't just snap on the morning of the fire. No, she had thought this through. And they had proof. They described how, days before the fire, Linda seemed to push her sons away. She made sure they were not home. She told them Todd was tired and not to bother him. On the morning of the fire, she even made a quick trip to a gas station, buying a small amount of fuel and hiding it in her car. Then, according to the theory, she drugged Todd with a sedative in his coffee. Maybe it was to keep him calm. Maybe it was to make sure he couldn't fight back. Either way, investigators believed she waited until he was nearly unconscious before she poured gasoline on him and all around the living room. Then she lit the fire. But Todd wasn't dead yet. The evidence showed that he woke up burning, panicked, and in agony and somehow managed to stumble out of the house. He collapsed in the snow, naked except for sweatpants pulled down to his ankles. And what did Linda do? According to prosecutors, she got in the van, and instead of rushing to help him, she drove in the wrong direction and ran him over either by accident or on purpose. Either way, she finished what the fire had started. The courtroom was silent as the story unfolded. Everyone could feel it. This wasn't just a tragic accident. It was something darker, something colder. One of the most powerful parts of the trial came when forensic experts took the stand. These scientists weren't interested in drama. They just reported the facts. First, the fire investigator said without hesitation, this was arson. He explained how the pattern of the fire proved it wasn't started by a candle or oil lamp. It burned too fast, too hot, and in too many places. He pointed out that gasoline was found on the floor, on the furniture, and most disturbingly in Todd's clothing. That included his socks, sweatpants, and even the waistband of his underwear. A crime lab analyst confirmed that the residue from the gas can found outside matched what was on Todd's body. This meant the accelerant came from the same source. It wasn't some old spill or coincidence. It was fresh. It was deliberate. The medical examiner also confirmed the worst. Todd had third-degree burns over 90% of his body. But that wasn't all. He had 4 deep wounds on his head and 2 broken ribs. That proved something else. Todd had been attacked before the fire. He had either been beaten or struck by a car, or both. The evidence told a story more horrifying than anyone wanted to believe. Linda hadn't just lost control. She had carried out a series of actions that pointed to premeditation, planning, and cruelty, and the jury was listening closely. As the trial went on, the Sturmer family broke apart in front of everyone's eyes. On one side were Linda's daughters Ashley and Brittany. They defended their mother fiercely. They said Todd had been abusive, controlling, and angry. They believed Linda acted in fear and desperation. On the other side were Trevor and Trenton, Todd's sons. They stood firmly against their mother. They said Todd had been strict but loving. They never saw him hurt Linda, and they were horrified by her actions after his death. The courtroom became a battlefield. One family, 2 sides, each with their own version of the truth. At one point, Trevor testified about how Linda's story changed repeatedly. One day, she said she saw Todd on fire. Another day, she claimed she couldn't get up the stairs. Sometimes she said she ran out the front door, other times the basement. And when they questioned her, she screamed. She slapped them. Once, she even pulled over and bloodied Trenton's nose. These weren't the actions of an innocent person. The jury watched these siblings cry, argue, and fall apart on the stand. The pain was real. And so was the damage. Just when the trial seemed like it couldn't get any worse for Linda, another witness stepped forward, an inmate who had been in jail with her. She told the court that Linda had confessed to the murder while behind bars. "She told me she did it," the inmate claimed. "She said she drugged him, then lit the fire. She thought it was the only way out." The defense jumped on this. They said jailhouse confessions are unreliable. They argued the inmate just wanted attention or a deal. Still, the jury heard it, and they couldn't ignore it. Because it wasn't just the confession. It was everything. The gas, the injuries, the towel soaked in fuel, the coffee mug Linda wanted to hide. All of it pointed in one direction, and the end was near. After weeks of testimony, evidence, and emotional breakdowns, the jury left to deliberate. It didn't take long. In February 2010, they returned to the courtroom with their verdict: guilty. On all counts, Linda Sturmer was convicted of first-degree premeditated murder and arson. She sat motionless as the judge read the decision. Some said she looked stunned. Others said she looked angry. The judge called her actions monstrous. He spoke about the agony Todd must have felt in his final moments. He mentioned the pain the children would carry forever. Linda was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole.